And there we go. Dave, thank you for being here.
Well, thank you for inviting me, Adam. It's always nice to chat with you and Murray.
It
And all
is.
your friends, new friends for me.
Yeah, we have a bunch of them and even more that will tune in after it's recorded and that we put it up on YouTube channel and let people see it. I mean, there's a lot of reasons for doing this. The ostensible from the outside one is that Dave, you're going to be doing something I think really exciting, which is writing a column monthly for us and Clarice members, and sharing your thoughts on whatever you're thinking about in the world of wine, with no limitations and nothing nothing along that manner of things, so that you're doing that. But honestly, I should have done this a long time ago. You were the first person way back. I looked it up actually on March 10th of 2018. You were the actual first person that ever wrote up Clarice Wine Company in the entire world.
Uh, I'm surprised I beat Eric Asimov, I guess, but it was an interesting and I thought rather new uh, marketing technique that I've always been interested in how small producers need to work in and around the three-tier system and the direct to consumer model, and your subscription model just seemed very novel and interesting, at least to me.
Well, I mean, I appreciate it, and I remember that it drew quite a following, and a lot of people were very interested. And so I should have done it way back when. But so forgive me for being late, but I am thrilled to have you here. It's a very bucolic scene you have behind you there too.
Yeah, actually, it's much better than the actual disorganization of the room behind me. This is a photograph I took along a trail very close to our house where we walk our dogs. We have a great thing. We're right in Montgomery County, Maryland, so just outside the DC line and just outside the Beltway, but we have this stream that's the northwest branch of the Anacostia River, and it's wonderful trails maintained there, and
Well,
we just really enjoy going there. So
it's beautiful. Hopefully, the real weather outside is as nice as that is.
the last few days have been spectacular. The pollen is falling from the sky. The cars are green, you know.
Yeah. We've been out in vineyards the last few days, and I am sniffling and did an appropriate dose of Afrin and antihistamines and alcohol right now. So that maybe is not recommended, but it's going to get me through the Zoom. So
It's funny how a few sips of wine can really help the sniffles.
it does. It does. People, I want to let you know also use the chat section if you have questions, and I will relay them to Dave. But Dave, I want to start out, and I actually am shocked that I don't really know this, but you wrote about wine for the Washington Post for what, over 17 years? But I don't even know really how you got started. I mean, maybe we talked about it once, but I don't recall. How did this process start for you? Hmm?
Well, my wife and I fell in love with wine on a trip to California back in 1988, I believe it was, early in our marriage. And we were visiting friends in Alameda. We had an extra day, and they said, "What would you like to do?" And we shrugged and said, "How about Napa?" And that got us hooked. And we came back to DC and started going to various wine stores that had, the free tastings on Saturday.
Were you drinking wine, the two of you, before that? Some, but not.
Not much. When I was in school, it was in Michigan. It was, the cost cutter wine from Kroger and the big jugs and sort of thing. And this really kind of piqued our interest. And then we came home and went to the wine stores, started meeting people, talking to people, trying different wines, going to local wineries, and that piqued our interest in the local wines in Virginia and Maryland. And then I was working as a journalist, so writing about it became a way to learn about it. And
What were you writing about before wine? Hmm?
oh, I was in one of those journalism jobs that only exist in Washington, the trade publication that follows every regulation and every congressional hearing to the bitter end, and writes it up in an expensive newsletter for lawyers and lobbyists who don't want to go to those hearings or read those Federal Register notices. So, it was a good job, but not a career ahead of me. So this writing about food and wine became a sideline. And actually, I'm approaching my 30th anniversary of my first published article this October. Was also in the food section of the Washington Post on how international politics affect the availability of spices.
Oh, wow.
And if you remember, Christopher Columbus's exploration was a lot about spices. And at that point, President Clinton was recognizing Vietnam. So Vietnamese cinnamon was about to become
Mhm.
available. And that was making a gentleman in Milwaukee named Bill Penzie very excited. You've probably heard of Penzie Spices. He's still around and
Sure.
um, still making some wonderful spice blends that have helped a lot of us make better dinners. And so that was my first published article. And then I started focusing on wine a little bit later and wrote for various local publications and websites as they were coming in. Some of your friends might remember a website out of the Santa Rosa Press Democrat called winetoday.com.
Yeah.
I wrote several articles for them before they.
Tim Fish was there, and Leslie Sbrocco, and yeah.
Yep. And they were my editors. And then I wrote for some local magazines and also started my own email newsletter, which I called Dave McIntyre's Wine Line. And that later became a blog and is now my main outlet on Substack in retirement. I'm trying to revive that. So, but then I always kind of looked at the Washington Post wine column and said, wow, I'd really like to write that. And got the opportunity in 2008. So I started there in October. I think my first column was published October 1st, and in those days it came out in print before it went online. And I wrote their weekly wine column until this January when I signed off.
Sure. There was already a column going. Obviously, you said at the Washington Post at the time.
Yes, they had a column for many years. I think at one point a gentleman named Robert Parker actually contributed some. There was a
I've heard of him before, Bob.
yeah,
Yeah, somehow.
there was a food editor at the Post who later went to Chicago, and he had written it, and it sort of bounced around. But for 20 years, it was a gentleman named Ben Giliberti,
Mm-hmm.
and for 10 of those years, he alternated weeks with another gentleman named Michael Franz, who now runs a website called Wine Review Online.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
And so they did it for 20 years, and then there was some churn and turnover, and it ended up with me, which was fairly stable for a little over 16 years. So
I do have a vitally important question that there is a fellow Michigan Wolverine on here, and he's wondering what years he went to the University of Michigan.
well, I was in Michigan for graduate school,
Okay.
which means I was gradually deciding I didn't want to go to school anymore. But I was in Ann Arbor from 81 through 84,
Cool.
studying political science.
So, which is fun. That was my minor in college, so that we have that in common. So over 17 years at the Washington Post writing about wine. I mean, I assume you saw a lot change in your job. Obviously, in the wine world, you saw a lot change, but in the job, in people's knowledge of wine, what I mean, are there any things that really stand out to you as to what happened in 17 years that changed your life or job, or just reflections on wine, basically?
Well, um, there's two different questions there. Do you
Is
want
it
to
maybe
focus
three,
on wine, or
maybe three or four?
should
Focus
we?
first on your job, because I am interested in the job of writing about wine, and then also we'll get into the broader wine discussion. But let's just focus about what changed in wine writing over 17 years.
Okay. Well, first I should stress that I was always a freelance writer. I was never a Washington Post staffer.
Mhm.
So this was the second job. I had a regular salaried government job that paid the bills and allowed me to pursue my side hustle, as it were. So I was never really on the inside of the newspaper as for what was going on. And as you probably everybody knows, it was a very turmoil time for the Washington Post and for journalism in general. But I think on the whole, how I would say it evolved when I took over the column in 2008. We were still very much in the throes of the French paradox, wine being good for you and wine being, expanding and everybody enjoying it. And there was talk that wine should be an everyday beverage like it is in Europe for many people in their cultures. And I saw my job partly as pointing people towards good, inexpensive wine, to just to get the bang for your buck, because there's so much wine out there of varying quality. There's value in having somebody who tastes a lot and can point readers to the quality Cote de Rhone for $8 that tastes like $15 or something
Mhm.
like that. And of course, when I started in '08 was the great financial crisis. So we kind of pivoted very quickly and did recession busters, which were wines under $10 and then $15. And as the economy got better, I declared the recession over and said, screw that, I'm going to go up to 20 and
Thank
25.
thank you for doing that for us.
Yes, I did have a friend who is in the trade pointedly tell me, you do know that some people do spend $30 on a bottle of wine every now and then, right? But, so as also, I told my editors that I wanted to focus on local issues. I started out that one column a month would either be about a local winery or a local wine store or a local sommelier doing something interesting, the local wine scene. They were very supportive of that. So I did, the what everybody does, the Judgment of Paris tasting, where I did the Judgment of DC and called some professionals in and said, we're going to do the US versus France, just like Stephen Spurrier did, only I threw in Virginia along with California to surprise them. And of course it had the predicted result, and I was able to write, hey, Virginia makes good wine. And I featured some new wineries because this was a very active and very vibrant time in Virginia and Maryland. So I highlighted some new up and coming stars like Old Westminster. I think I was the first to write about them in Maryland. And of course, Barbersville is well established in Virginia. But I was able to do that because I didn't have to travel very far. But I
Sure.
also wanted to highlight the local scene.
It certainly fit
Unfortunately,
their budget, I'm sure, for travel for the newspaper for you.
yeah, yeah. But
But
so
I think it's important to do that. Were they limiting at all? And I don't want to get into too many of the details, but I know that if a wine wasn't available in your market, say you tasted something fantastic was that a limiting factor about writing about something?
well, it was a limited factor in recommending
Okay.
a wine because with each column I would recommend 5 wines. We later pared that back to 3 the last few years. But so I would do 5 wines a week, and we would list stores where they're available, which was a lot of work, as you can
Mhm.
imagine, because we're talking about 3 markets: DC, Virginia, Maryland. So sometimes that's 3 distributors,
Sure.
usually just 2, but sometimes 3 to work with. And the information was kind of all over the place. So people were complaining, well, I went to this store you listed and they didn't have it, and they said they never had it, things like that. But so those had to be locally available for me to review the wines. But I could write about other subjects. I mean, I
Well,
could write about something interesting happening somewhere else. And I tried to look for the cultural aspects, the historical aspects, how wine fits in, you know, through admittedly Western culture, but and history, and how it's kind of connects us to each other and to our environment, or to the people who make it, as we meet along the way. And what I found, at the same time the Post was growing digitally online, their
mhm.
website. If I probably not speaking too far out of line to say that the Post has always been a little bit behind the New York Times as far as the sophistication of their website. It's gotten a lot better now, but I always found that my impact was in the print edition and the Wednesday food section that carried
Mhm.
my column. And I would hear from a distributor that, oh, that wine you wrote up, I sold out of it, X number of cases in 3 days. People were walking into the store with your column. I would always ask, was it torn out of the paper or was it a computer printout? No one ever said it was a computer printout, or that they were looking on their phone. They had it torn out of the paper. So the print edition was where I was having my impact. But as the newspaper started evolving to more digital, they realized that their subscribers weren't just local. They were in Denver and Seattle and San
Sure.
Francisco and elsewhere. So the Post, and this happened after the change of ownership, shall we say, um, decided it was no longer a local paper. So there was some pressure to not be local, but I was still reviewing wines anyway. But not be local means not writing about Virginia or Maryland as much.
Yeah. Did,
And
did did Granholm, I mean, I hate to get too far afield, but obviously Granholm and that ruling, and I don't remember when that happened, but the ability for people to order wine, it also, I think, could play into some of that too, so that you wines that previously weren't available to some people might now be available to people.
right, and Granholm, if I recall correctly, was 2004. So it was already, those changes were already happening.
Okay.
I started with the column, and I did try to write about the growth of the direct to consumer sector. And personally, I've been a little disappointed that it hasn't grown more.
Yeah.
But there was still, every now and then I would put in, this is available from the winery, and I'd get complaints.
Okay.
So it was hard. I didn't get a whole lot of reader feedback, but usually, how it is most of the time. What you hear is negative.
Well, Dave, I mean, just to be, I mean, and maybe I was remiss in not telling you this. When you did write about Clarice, we got about 110 subscribers out of it. For a brief period of time, we had more Clarice members on the East Coast and in the DC area than we did in California, which was amazing after that. So,
Well, good. I'm glad.
so it did have an influence quite a bit.
But I think that was, to get back to your question, that was
Yeah.
basically how writing a wine column changed, because the publication's getting more digital. And I have not spoken to Eric Asimov about this, but I kind of sense that he's feeling some of the same pressure,
Hmm.
just from how the New York Times is treating him and some of his writing. Um, and the other thing, of course, is when they're looking at digital, the metric becomes how many people are clicking on your articles.
Sure. Mm.
And I had the two disadvantages there. One, wine is a niche subject. Not everybody's going to read it, and to look at something, to read something online, you kind of have to look for it. Whereas in the newspaper, like, oh, that photo's interesting. Let me
Yeah.
read this, even though I don't drink one. So, and also, wine comes at the end of the alphabet. So when my articles would post on Thursday afternoon, they'd be at the top of the page for an hour or two until the next feature posted, and then they'd slide to the bottom, and you'd have to scroll and scroll and scroll. And I even got tired scrolling, looking for my own stuff
Yeah.
at times. So I I think that was a bit of a disadvantage. Um, Also, the other thing I was thinking of saying in regard to this is that dynamic I mentioned at the beginning, that trying to tell people what good value wines are out there um, for everyday drinking, ultimately is not the way the wine industry is going currently.
Hmm.
And it's not the way society is going. We're sort of backing off on alcohol consumption in general, and there's more, I guess, a little more health concerns, and we can get touch that third rail if we want to, I guess. But also just the premiumization, like Constellation dropping their inexpensive brands and focusing more on the expensive labels. I think the wine industry maybe never was really comfortable making an everyday drink. It's more a special occasion drink. And I know, your dial tone is priced. Uh,
Fairly, but it's still not cheap. I mean, the only thing I might take exception to what you're saying would be, I think that's the U.S. wine industry. I think, I mean, apparently at an event not too long ago, and I'm just really kind of third hand here, but at the Unified Symposium, Jean-Charles Boisset did something and said, perhaps California should kind of give up making a lot of under $20 wines. And we should do that on up to say that that's not really happening for us in places like Spain are the location that we're going to find those. And I do think, and they subsidize wine, they subsidize grape growing, they do all sorts of things in Spain, and we choose to subsidize grain farmers, perhaps, or in this country. I mean,
yeah,
we all do our things. So it's,
right.
I'm not trying to complain. I'm just saying it's different.
Yeah. But I think we are kind of moving back to wine not being a drink for everyone and or every day.
Yeah.
And there's nothing inherently wrong with that.
No.
But it does kind of narrow the scope of a wine columnist in a daily newspaper, a major metropolitan newspaper, rather than, and puts more emphasis on a specialist publication like the wine magazines or bloggers like Jeb Dunnick, or
Yeah.
he shouldn't necessarily call him a blogger, but those specialist publications.
Well, and I did want to ask you about that. So I think in what we need in the wine world right now, and people who write for newspapers do a huge service because I think we need more consumers, and you have the opportunity. Um, People who write for newspapers have the opportunity, or for broader outlets. I mean, let's just not even say write for newspaper. If somebody called me up and said, you want to talk about wine on the Today Show, or where Ray Isle goes on a couple of national shows or whatever. I think they are providing exposure to wine to people. If you're already subscribing to Jeb, I think Jeb's great, but you're already into wine. You're paying the money. You're a subscriber. You're this, but I think you're introducing people, or you did for the longest time, introduce people to wine that might not have had an experience with wine otherwise.
I hope so.
Yeah, and I think unfortunately we've lost a lot of those outlets now. I mean, you don't see as many syndicated wine columnists or local papers devoting somebody to writing about wine. It's just not something that's out there as much.
Yeah, I think in terms of major newspapers, obviously you have Eric in the New York Times and
Yeah.
Letty Teague in the Wall Street Journal, and Esther and Jen in the San Francisco Chronicle,
Yeah.
who maybe are more reporting than reviewing, but
Sometimes on some of them, yeah, without a
yeah.
doubt. I mean, it's kind of local for them in some ways.
And then others, I think, may occasionally have some features. And I think there are still some people who are syndicated around some of the local newspapers, smaller newspapers throughout the country. But yeah, it used to be every newspaper had somebody or syndicated somebody.
Yeah. Yeah, that's to me a shame in some ways. I mean, a loss in some regard. I mean, along this time too, and without getting too far afield, the newspapers themselves, like you said, the print editions were cutting down, the advertising revenue was a challenge. I mean, there was all sorts of things that were going on that was making it more difficult for really to get in print as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, so there was a lot of challenge. All right, so is it something? I mean, right now we're reading and hearing all sorts of things about the wine world being challenged. I assume that wine writing probably goes along with that too. I mean, the idea that it would be different, like, okay, boy, somebody's going to pay me to write about wine when they're having trouble, when places are having trouble selling wine or whatever. I mean, it's that's hard in some ways. I mean, CNBC, I did read one time that visitorship or viewing goes down when the market's down, and when the market's up, everybody likes watching CNBC.
Yeah,
So
they want to pull their head out of the sand and look. Um, yeah, I mean, one thing, if you were to look at the Washington Post food section, the print food section 7, 8, 10 years ago, most of the advertising was wine stores.
okay,
Calvert Woodley would have most of a page. A store named Paul's usually had an ad. Rodman's had an ad that included food and some wine, and a couple of other stores too. But those ads started falling by the wayside, and one of the stores went out of business, and or the ads got smaller. So it was kind of like, I would be looking at that going, uh-oh,
sure,
this is a sign. But so, I mean, that obviously falling advertising revenue is a problem for newspapers overall
yeah,
around the country. So I didn't take that personally, but it was obviously a sign of perhaps
yeah.
less support in the market, as it were.
Sure. So, you now are writing on Substack,
Along
and
with everybody else, yes.
yeah, yeah, with a large number of folks, but you brought over a decent number of followers with you, it seems like. And how many times do you write now a week about wine? And what's the are wineries still paying attention to you there? Or how's that changed?
Yeah, well, I decided that my retirement project would be to revive my blog,
Hmm.
which I still call Dave McIntyre's Wine Line, but put it on Substack. I had it on WordPress for many years, but I never liked that platform, and I didn't post very often because I was busy writing uh, 2 pieces a week for the Washington Post that paid money. So I had let it languish, but I did have an email list of about 750 names, which I was able to import into Substack in January when I started that. And most of them have not yet unsubscribed. And that, which is good. And and I've actually increased the subscriptions. It might be leveling off this week. I think people took off for spring break maybe, but yeah, I'm up to around a little over 1,400 now,
That's
which
doubling.
is,
That's impressive. Mhm.
and I'm trying to find a rhythm right now. I'm posting twice a week. I don't want to appear in everybody's email too often because I know how that feels. And also because I have some other projects in mind that I'm trying to do and have time for, and um, one of which involves the scene behind me here on this photo, actually. But the so I so far the response is good.
Good.
I'm hearing good things from you and others in the
Yeah.
wine trade, and getting pretty good reader reactions. So I'm thinking that it's probably a go. I'm enjoying it. That's the main thing.
Sure. What are you in the wine world right now? What are you enjoying? I mean, you're enjoying the column and the freedom in writing and all of that, but what are you just seeing out in the world of wine right now that's exciting or interesting to you?
Well, I think I'm very interested in how the industry is responding to climate change,
Mhm.
and has been and have been interested in that for years. I wrote several columns on that for the Post way back, but probably focusing on it beginning in 2018 or 2019. And so I want to follow that as much as possible. And I'm trying to do, I don't know if I want to call it a deep dive because that sounds too pretentious or promising too much, but I'm really looking at right now at like Oregon Chardonnay for
Yep.
something I'll try to write later this summer, and just tasting a whole bunch of them in a way that I wasn't really able to do as a weekly columnist. Um, and The politics of it, as anybody who has read me on Substack knows, I've written a few pieces about the new anti-alcohol
Mhm.
movement, which I call the new prohibition. That has not caught on yet, in in other publications or anything, but there are others writing about it. And you've probably all heard this, the idea that there is no safe level of alcohol consumption. And people tell me, well, it's not really a prohibition movement because nobody's calling for alcohol to be banned. But what I'm seeing as a communications specialist, sort of taking my hat from my government job, which was in public affairs, that the no safe level folks are trying to change the discussion away from moderate, responsible consumption of alcohol. Because when we came up, when we came up, when I fell in love with wine back in the 80s, was right when they were putting government warning labels on wine, and we had Mothers Against Drunk Driving. But this was basically, hey, know that there's a problem here. You can drink, but drink moderately and don't do it stupidly. Don't drink and drive. Don't drink and operate a forklift. Uh, don't make an idiot of yourself at the office Christmas party, sort of thing. And now
You never
they
went to a
are,
Siduri Christmas party back in the day, but
right.
that's another story.
But now they are uh, basically trying to say just don't drink,
Yeah.
and that's changing the discussion. And I think when you hear people answer and say, but there's this other study that says moderate consumption is good for your heart or something like that. That's all well and good, but we're not going to win that battle. We have to try to keep the discussion focused on moderate, responsible consumption rather than alcohol bad, which has the advantage of being a simple, easy to understand
You
message.
know, I enjoy writing a column monthly, only monthly for North Bay Biz, and I write some stuff. And one that I just recently wrote was about how wine has. I actually wrote two. One was about seeking a perfect wine and how we used to be looking for wine critics for the Bob Parkers of the world, the 100-point wine, and then we'd all go chase out of the perfect wine after the perfect wine. And now I think we're looking for more personal wine. We want to hear stories. And I think that's what is something that is, to me, going to help wine. I agree with you. I don't think we're going to win the health battle when it comes to this. But I think if the health part of it encompasses all of us, I mean, here, a group of people together, and then when you get together with friends, enjoying a bottle of wine, enjoying some wine in moderation, hanging out, socializing together, that kind of thing, we can win that battle because wine does engender those types of interactions.
Yeah, and we're hearing a lot more. I think. I mean, I've written it, but others have too. That wine is connection. I mean,
Mhm.
wine. I'll confess, I do sometimes enjoy a glass of Pinot by myself, but it always tastes better when I'm sharing it with somebody else, and it tastes better usually with food and and just having that connection with the person you're sharing it with, or with the winemaker you met on your visit to wine country, or who you subscribe to, and things like that. And it's a connection through the vintage. It's a connection to another time, another year. Through the vineyard, it's a connection to another place.
Yeah.
And in a way, in that sort of way, wine is unique and special. And that kind of story and that kind of connection, whether it's the consumer connecting to it or the winemaker connecting to the vineyard or to his customers or her customers, or a sommelier reading a table uh, properly, and making a customer happy, uh, it's that sort of connection, and that is special.
Yeah.
And I don't think we can get that from other. Well, Moray might say that tequila she was talking about earlier, but before everybody came on. But that sort of connection I'd like to explore too in my writing.
Sure. I don't think you ever did, or maybe I'm wrong, but did you ever like rate wines on a one the 100-point scale? Were you ever a fan of that, or what were your thoughts on that?
The only time I've done that is one of the limited times I judge a wine competition that's
Okay.
using points. I don't use them for my reviews. In the Washington Post, I had and I did this on my own. I started with a 3-star system.
Hmm.
1 star, very good. 2 stars, excellent. 3 stars, exceptional. I later bumped that up to 4 because, and then I would have half stars because there's always a way to fudge it. But um, I always viewed it as just an indication of my excitement for the wine.
Yeah.
So when I added fourth, I called it sublime, and tried to make that very rare. But um, you know, towards the end of my tenure, we were getting more comments online, and I kept hearing people or seeing people comment, "Why would I buy a wine that's only 2 stars? I'm not going to spend money on something that's only 2 stars." because they're putting their own reference to it,
Yeah.
and they're not looking at two means excellent. And so I guess you're never going to please everybody,
No, I
but
mean it's a hard thing when I'm blending wines. When Murray and I are sitting down and we're tasting through her wines or my wines. I mean, we do each other's together. I rate each barrel on a scale of A to F, with A minuses, B pluses, and all of that. But occasionally I do something like, okay, this is a B minus because this is very, very tannic. But I mean, what's unique from a blender's point of view is, boy, that could work in a blend. I mean, by itself, it's like this is a B minus, but if the blend we come up with needs some tannin, and this barrel has a lot of tannin and not much else, that could be the perfect addition to a blend. So that's I think we all put some sort of scale on things at times, whether or not, boy, I really love this wine, or I love this wine, or that was a really good wine. I mean, we're still putting some scale on things. So,
yeah, I have a friend who used to write for the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. You may know him, Gil Coolers,
oh yeah,
and he used to use a system of, you know, thumbs down, thumbs sideways, one thumb up, two thumbs way up. It was kind of like John and Dottie in the Wall Street Journal putting the exclamation point on
sure.
delicious, at the end. And it's a way to indicate enthusiasm for the wine without quantifying. When I added the fourth star, we changed the third star for some reason to extraordinary. That was actually my fault, but I won't get into that. But somebody actually tried to write to me and argue that you can't call a wine extraordinary because extraordinary means, and I'm making the number up, it's something like 1 in 12,000. And I'm like, dude, you don't get the point.
Right.
you know? So, people are always going to quibble.
Sure. No, and no doubt. And people have different scales. And it's one of those things that I always said, if somebody, writes up a Clarice wine and said, I just didn't like that wine. For me, it tasted too acidic. How can I argue with that? Because, for them, it tasted too acidic and they didn't like it. I can't argue with that. If they said Adam used too much American oak on this Clarice Pinot when I don't use any American oak, then one can easily make an argument on that because it's not factually correct. But if somebody doesn't like it, or if somebody doesn't find that your recommendations in their palate align, um, so be it. Maybe you need to write up for them the wines that sucked that you tried and they would like them or something. I don't know. It's hard to you can't match everybody.
I think I only really did that once. I tried to avoid writing negative reviews,
Yeah.
but there was one year I took the top 10 selling wines that were in some list. So we're talking like Apothic and Sutter Home, various things. And I went to the local stores, bought them, bagged them, had a few friends in the trade and out of the trade come by, and we tasted them. And then I printed the comments, including things like tire fire and do not put in mouth,
Yeah.
things like that. And I did hear back from a PR person for one of the larger wine companies who said, yeah, there were a lot of grimaces when we read them.
Yeah.
But yeah.
It's Murray and I did a tasting with some other winemakers where we went and bought the bottom shelf at Safeway, and we did 8 cabs, 8 shards, and 8 pinots blind. And in the cab category, we found a couple that were pretty good. In the shard category, a couple that were pretty good, probably a little sweet, but okay, And then the pinot category is pretty dismal. It was hard on that true bottom shelf level to come up with a lot of stuff.
Yeah, I over the years I've found too that finding a really good Pinot Noir under 20 is difficult. And some are palatable, some are pretty good and some are just awful.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a tough category. So, as you are looking ahead, I mean, first off, writing a column for us at Clarice, which we're very excited about. And again, I kind of told you you can write about anything, but don't write about our wines, because I think
You do
that's
that.
yeah, I'd rather the point with this is to provide a service and knowledge to people that are Clarice members and your expertise and insight. But I mean, what do you see right now that's going on? Kind of, I mean, in the wine world, you've written about Virginia wines. I mean, at least for the people here, who may not be as familiar with them. I mean, what's happening in Virginia? For a long time, it was like, what would I hear? Viognier and Horton Norton and this or that. But I assume things have evolved since then.
They have. Viognier is out of fashion.
Mhm.
Um, Petit Manseng is very popular as a white wine, a white grape. It's got the advantage of high acidity and high sugar. So for years, the challenge was to make a good dry one, and now people have kind of figured that out. But you still have a few styles from dry to off dry to dessert that can be really, really delicious. There's a Norton actually is gaining some popularity and notoriety now. And there's a little more attention on hybrids in part because of climate change, and they're figuring out how to make better wine from some of the hybrid grapes. And there's a focus on altitude, high elevation vineyards. I was actually, and I wrote this up, so you may have seen this one, Adam, invited to a tasting of Virginia Pinot Noir.
Mhm.
And there were about 8 wineries represented. And one of them that I had not heard of, though I know the winemaker, is at 3,000 feet elevation, kind of at the top of the Blue Ridge Mountains. The address is the Blue Ridge Trail. And so apparently you can't even get there all the times of the year. But they do Pinot and Riesling, and I think some Pinot Gris perhaps. But the Pinot Noirs were very light and sort of ephemeral, but delicious.
Mhm.
And I really look forward to following them, and I hope they succeed and are able to continue making it over the years. So I need to get down there to 12 Ridges is the name of it, and I don't know whether they're on number 10 or 12 or all 12 or what, but
Sure. Mhm.
um, and then there are others that are advertising higher elevation in the Shenandoah Valley.
It's interesting. We had a couple of people talk about Cab Franc in here, and one of the things I think about Cab Franc that it's fascinating. It works in Bordeaux and it works in Chinon, but it produces very different wines in each. But obviously, in a very cool climate, you can produce somewhat lighter but wonderfully aromatic wines, and yet it can also produce a wine with great depth and concentration in other areas. And I think something like that makes a lot of sense to, what opportunities and what the vintage gives you too to make something.
Yeah, and it's a very interesting comparison, say, of New York Cabernet Franc, which is the cooler, lighter aromatic style that you just mentioned, and Virginia, which is a warmer climate. The wines tend to be a little richer, uh,
Mhm.
and I think a lot of the Virginia winemakers would say they're Loire inspired, but if you put Virginia and New York side by side and make a generalization, you would say New York is Loire and Virginia is more Bordeaux.
Got it. Mhm.
Um, but they're delicious, and they and divergent in style. I mean, it's not monotone in style, and as you said, vintage specific.
Yeah, I mean, that was one of the things in Texas way back in the day when I was there in wine retail and more familiar even with the wines that I am now. but there could be a large variance in vintages at the time based on, I mean, in Texas, you'd have hail, you'd have, tornadoes, you'd have, and I think in Virginia, in some years, I mean, maybe they've gone a little further south now, but hurricanes were at times issues with causing a bunch of rain to come in, at least if not a direct hit of a hurricane. So,
Yeah, no, hurricanes are still an issue because the timing is right around harvest
yeah.
usually. And even last year, the 24 was shaping up to be a great year, but a storm was coming up, and the wineries were faced with that age-old question: Do I let it hang and hope for the best, or do I pick a little earlier than I really want to? And
We've
most of
all
them,
faced that at times. So yeah, you're right.
yeah, you all do.
Yeah,
And uh, but that's one of the things that makes it so exciting.
yeah.
You can't expect it to taste exactly like it did last year.
No, and in California, sometimes it's the same question, but it's like, oh my God, it's going to get so damn hot. Do we pick before the heat? But it's the same argument. I mean, it's just a
Yeah.
different climactic condition that's facing you at that time. So, um, cool. Well, I mean, we're kind of getting near the end, so if people want to ask some questions, please feel free to do so. But I think one of the things I'm looking forward to most is you introducing us to some of these other wineries and other things that you taste, and but also sharing like some personal stories and things with people, because I think that's important these days to get a feel for what people are doing. And one of the things with Clarice, and when you wrote about it back in the day, and that I still really believe, is that we need more good people drinking more good wine from all over the place. I'm not, uh, I'm fairly egotistical. Murray, you want to chime in on that one? But I don't believe that everybody's going to drink nothing but Clarice wine or Murray's wine or whatever all the time. I think we need to have a lot of variety out there with wine to keep people exciting. I leftover ham, and so we're making jambalaya tonight with the ham, and I'm trying to figure out what in the wine room here we're gonna pull out for that, and it's not going to be our wine tonight. So
Yeah.
that's a thing.
Well, and that's something too that I've had to tell people constantly over the years when they say, "Well, okay, this Virginia winery, RDV, launched in 2011, Bordeaux style red blends, lots of money poured into it. They're doing everything right, hiring the right consultants and everything, and charging an arm and a leg for the bottle." But the time this is the winery that sold to Chateau Montrose last year.
Yeah,
It's now called Lost Mountain, but their top wine was selling at $250 a bottle. And people are like, "Well, how can a Virginia wine charge that much?" And I said, "Well, he's not making enough for everybody,
yeah,
and he's not trying to make a $10 wine, and he's obviously getting it.
yeah,
People are buying it for whatever reason, and you know that's the sort of thing. Not everybody's going to be drinking Clarice every night because there's not enough Clarice
yeah.
there. You're not making enough of that. But for a special occasion, and my wife actually gave me permission to open one of yours. I'm trying to put it in front of the camera
Ah,
now. So
wonderful. Thank you.
it's the Santa Lucia Highlands
Yeah.
that I'm enjoying right now, um, and uh, it's great. So
Well, I appreciate that. Yeah, I mean, I think the better question, probably it's not why how could a Virginia wine charge $250, but how can anybody charge $250? But if you can, and for some people, that's not a thing. So I
quick
get it.
world, every wine would cost, from to me, $20 a bottle.
Yeah.
But it's not a perfect world.
No, I might go 30, but whatever.
Okay.
That's fine. We would take that. Well, Dave, I mean, I appreciate you so much. I'm really looking forward to now I get to be your, knocking on your door saying, "Hey, when's the next column coming?" and being the hard ass editor. Not really. I'm not
We
gonna.
do need to discuss that, I guess.
Yeah. Well, no, I'm just hoping that more or less a month, 12 times a year, you come up with something for members and interact with people and if you find yourself out here, we'll do a member event sometimes with you. It's always the first Saturday in December is our holiday parties for Clarice members. So you could come and be an invited guest, and I know you love dogs, and we have Stout here, so you're welcome to crash at our place and get your dog fixed too while you're out.
All right. Well, thank you.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Dave. And I know everybody's saying they enjoyed it. If you want to unmute yourself, and folks tell Dave, thank you. I appreciate you all being here tonight very much. Even Marshall is a Michigan Wolverine there. So thank you for your comments and questions.
And if I can put in the the chat, I was
Yeah,
about to
please go ahead
somebody
and
else.
put it in here. Somebody did put it in again, but if you want to put it in one more time.
I was just gonna put in the web address for my
Yeah,
Substack.
please do that. I think,
There
let's
you
see.
go. But
Yeah, we've got it right here. So please subscribe to that, folks. It's a very easy thing to do. I'll send it out to all the Clarice members as well, so that everybody has an opportunity to hear from you there, and then hear from you as far as Clarice membership too. So thanks, Dave. Take care.
all right. Well, thank you. Bye
Yeah.
bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you very much.